world's destiny is not an accident, nor the result of blind political forces. It is, on the contrary, a series of meticulously written events, a timeline of fate already in process of execution. A final countdown was activated in human history when what logic and history considered impossible materialized. The rebirth of a nation erased from the map. To understand the magnitude of the imminent catastrophe and the hidden map that governs the last days, we must go back more than 2,500 years to a time when Israel had been conquered, divided, and was in the process of being eradicated. The 10 northern tribes had already been destroyed by Assyria more than a century earlier, and only Judah remained, weakened and broken by corruption, idolatry, and greed under the reign of weak kings like Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. The temple in Jerusalem still stood, but it was no longer considered holy. It had been contaminated by idols, and justice had been replaced by widespread greed. In the year 597 BC, judgment arrived just as the prophet Jeremiah had warned. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invaded Jerusalem for the second time, and although he did not destroy it immediately, he deported thousands of inhabitants, including nobles, artisans, soldiers, and a young 25-year-old priest named Ezekiel. Ezekiel belonged to a priestly family destined to serve in the temple from the age of 30 according to the law of Moses. However, his priesthood never came to be, as exile snatched it away. Ezekiel was taken to Tel Abib, an exiled settlement on the banks of the Shebar River, a canal in Babylon. There, a marginalized Jewish community lived, far from the temple, far from the promised land, and in essence, far from God. For 5 years, Ezekiel watched his people repeat their mistakes even in a foreign land. Many wondered if God had abandoned them, while others lost all hope and surrendered to the culture of Babylon. Israel had not only lost a military battle, it had betrayed the covenant, lost its purpose, and most importantly, had lost its faith. Ezekiel lived between the world of promise and the world of punishment, prepared to serve God, but facing a broken people in a foreign land. It was just when Ezekiel turned 30, the exact age he would have begun his priesthood, that God spoke to him. Suddenly the heavens opened, a storm arose with lightning and a thick cloud wrapped in fire. Inside it, God's cherubim moved, 4 living beings with 4 faces: man, lion, ox, and eagle. Alongside them, wheels within wheels moved, covered with eyes that moved without turning, a vision impossible to describe. Ezekiel understood that he was witnessing the glory of God moving, leaving the temple and abandoning Jerusalem. In the land of enemies, in the midst of exile, God said to him, "Son of man, stand up, for I am speaking to you." Ezekiel fell to the ground in terror. God gave him a scroll that he had to eat, written inside and out with words of lament and sorrow. Although it contained judgment, in his mouth it tasted like honey. From that moment, Ezekiel became a prophet, appointed as a watchman, a lookout among ruins who had to warn and shout, even if no one wanted to listen. God imposed the most strange and symbolic mission on him, warning him that the people would not listen because their hearts were hardened, so he had to preach with his own body. Ezekiel was ordered to lie on his side for 390 days for the sin of Israel, and then 40 more days for Judah. He had to eat rationed bread, cooked over dung as a sign of the famine that would devastate Jerusalem. He shaved his head with a sword and divided his hair into 3 parts. One burned, another cut, and the last scattered to the wind, symbolizing how the people would fall by fire, sword, and dispersion. But the most difficult act came later. God announced to him, "The delight of your eyes will die, and you will not weep." His wife died, and Ezekiel was not allowed to mourn, because the fall of Jerusalem would be so brutal that there would not even be time for lament. Ezekiel lost everything: his home, his temple, and his wife. Having lost everything, God revealed the destiny of Israel to him in the vision of the valley of dry bones. He was taken in the spirit to a desolate, vast, silent, and arid place. The ground was covered with thousands of completely dry, fragmented bones, scattered at random and long abandoned. Ezekiel felt the crunch as he walked over those remains broken by the sun and time. The scene was the representation of spiritual truth. The valley was Israel destroyed, exiled, abandoned, a people reduced to dust. The dry bones represented a collective death, the image of a nation erased from the map and silenced by history. In the midst of that overwhelming silence, God asked him a disturbing question. "Son of man, can these bones live?" Logic shouted no, but Ezekiel, recognizing the power of the Lord to do the impossible, replied, "Lord, only you know." God ordered him to prophesy to the dry bones, "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones, I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life." It seemed absurd, but Ezekiel obeyed. As he began to speak, the ground began to tremble. A faint sound like an underground crunch grew into a rumble that echoed throughout the valley. The sound shook the bones, which began to move and join, bone with bone, fitting perfectly. Then tendons appeared. Flesh covered the bones and skin wrapped the bodies. A scattered army was rebuilding before his eyes, and what was a field of death was transformed into a valley full of complete human bodies, but they were not alive. They were not breathing, nor were they moving. They were still inert corpses. Then God ordered Ezekiel to do something deeper, to prophesy to the Spirit, to the very breath of life. "Prophesy, Son of man, and say to the Spirit, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Spirit, come from the four winds and blow on these slain that they may live." Ezekiel obeyed, and the Ruach, breath of God, invisible but real, descended upon them. The same breath that blew into Adam at the beginning descended again. The bodies began to breathe, their chests inflated, and life returned. Before Ezekiel stood an army, a living symbol of the rebirth of Israel, a people who were dead, but whom God resurrected. God revealed the meaning with clarity without leaving it to interpretation. "These bones are the whole house of Israel." The people in exile said, "Our bones are dried up and our hope has perished. We are cut off." God promised, "I will open your graves, my people, and will bring you up from your graves, and I will bring you to the land of Israel." These verses are the past, present, and future of the people. The valley represented the exile and the spiritual descent of a people who had gone down from their sacred mountain of Zion to the land of dust. The dry bones were a collective death, the image of a nation silenced by history. God called the nations in which Israel was scattered graves. The promise was clear: he would bring them out from among the dead. And he wrote down the prophetic order of the reconstruction process that would determine the end of times. Trembling and joining of bones, the physical territorial return, appearance of flesh, the political reconstruction, entry of the spirit, ruach, the spiritual restoration. For almost 2,000 years, Ezekiel's words seemed impossible to fulfill. In 70 AD, the armies of Rome destroyed Jerusalem and burned the Second Temple. Israel ceased to exist as a nation. The Jews were dispersed throughout the Roman Empire and later throughout the continent, living as foreigners, rejected, persecuted, and forced to hide their faith. It was the catastrophe that sealed the fate of ancient Israel, a diaspora that would last for centuries. Without a temple, without land, only a promise sustained them, the same one Moses had announced centuries before. "And the Lord will scatter you among all the peoples, from one end of the earth to the other. And among those nations you shall have no rest. nor shall the sole of your foot have a resting place. But although their identity seemed to fade, it never disappeared. The people preserved their lineage, their faith, and their longing to return. Every year, at every Passover celebrated in exile, they repeated a phrase that sounded impossible. Next year in Jerusalem. That longing kept the promise alive. The impossible was written. The land that had been abandoned would flourish. The people scattered like dust would return, and the forgotten name, Israel, would again be proclaimed among the nations. And that day came. On May 14, 1948, after the horror of the Holocaust, David Ben-Gurion declared the birth of the State of Israel in Tel Aviv. The nation of Israel disappeared for 2,000 years, came back to life, an unprecedented event in human history. Bones that had dried up began to join. Ezekiel's prophecy had just been activated. God had not said, "I will restore Jerusalem," but, "I will take the children of Israel from among the nations where they have gone, and will gather them from all parts and bring them to their own land." In just a few years, millions of Jews returned from more than 100 countries. The United States, Ethiopia, Russia, Argentina, Germany. People who did not speak the same language and who had never set foot in Jerusalem returned, and the bones joined again. Since then, Israel has been attacked, surrounded by enemies, and threatened every decade. But it remains and flourishes. In 1948, it was a desert, and today it exports technology, water, intelligence, and security. Hebrew, which was a dead language for centuries, is today the language of millions. It is not just a language, it is a living testimony that what is dead can live again. The prophecies of Isaiah that the desert would flourish like the lily have been fulfilled. Ezekiel's prophetic map consists of 3 stages. Israel has fulfilled 2, the physical return, joining of bones, and the political reconstruction, the flesh covered the body. But the last stage, the most crucial, is yet to happen. The entry of the Spirit, the Ruach of God, the spiritual restoration. Israel has not yet been transformed by the Spirit. The majority of the Israeli people still do not recognize the Messiah. The outpouring of the Spirit, the collective inner transformation announced by the prophets, has not occurred. The people are gathered in their land, the valley is no longer empty, but the breath has not yet descended. The prophets announced this final restoration. Jeremiah had announced it. "I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people." Joel promised, "I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh, and your sons will prophesy." Zechariah, the most graphic, spoke of a future day when the people of Israel would look on the one they have pierced and be broken, receiving a spirit of grace and prayer. The Apostle Paul, centuries later, dedicated 3 chapters of Romans to this mystery, revealing the key to time. A hardening in part has happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, and so all Israel will be saved. Today Israel has returned, the bones are joined and the flesh restored, but the Ruach of God has not descended. That will be the final miracle, a national awakening that will change history and begin the last stage of the prophetic plan. When the Ruach descends on Israel, it will be like fire crossing the world. In that future spiritual awakening, God will not only restore the heart of Israel, He will also seal a remnant for a sacred mission in the end times. The book of Revelation, chapter 7, reveals a crucial detail. God will select 144,000 sealed servants from among the 12 tribes of Israel. This is not just a symbolic number. Revelation specifies 12,000 from each tribe, representing a faithful and consecrated remnant. As the trumpets sound, the seals open, and humanity goes through the pains of final judgment, These 144,000 Israelites will act as messengers of the gospel, bringing light in the midst of the coming darkness. These sealed ones are real Israelites called by God to proclaim His truth when the world is enveloped in chaos and confusion. This mission is the final confirmation that, even in the midst of tribulation, God has not forgotten His people and will use them as an instrument of global salvation. The purpose of Israel culminates with its return to the heart of God, finally becoming what it was called to be, a light to the nations. Israel has once again become the center of conflict, the epicenter of world interest. Every war, every threat, every tension in Jerusalem is analyzed by the nations because what happens there affects the world. This was announced with clarity. I will make Jerusalem a cup that will cause all the surrounding peoples to tremble. The vision of Ezekiel does not end with the restoration. Immediately after the rebirth of Israel as a nation, the prophet receives another revelation, a prophetic war that connects directly with the end of times. A mysterious leader named Gog, prince of the land of Magog, leads a coalition of foreign nations that rise up to attack an already restored Israel, which lives in peace without walls or defenses. The names in this coalition are alarming for their relevance. Persia, currently Iran; Cush, currently Sudan; Put, currently Libya; Gomer and Togarmah, currently Turkey. All of them converge from the north, south, and east to a single point on the map: Jerusalem. Ezekiel describes this not as a simple geopolitical invasion, but as a divine appointment. God Himself says, I will put hooks in your jaws. I will make you come up against my land so that the nations may know me. This means that God will allow this attack to reveal Himself. It will be a judgment. When the armies of Gog are ready to attack, a great earthquake will occur. The mountains will collapse, the soldiers will turn against each other, and fire and sulfur will fall from the sky. It will not be Israel who defends itself. It will be God who fights, and the nations will know that He is the Lord. This final war was also seen by Zechariah centuries later. He describes the somber scenario. The nations will gather to attack Jerusalem. The city will be divided and the houses plundered. At that culminating moment, the Lord will descend and fight as in ancient days. Zechariah adds the crucial detail: and His feet will stand on that day on the Mount of Olives. This is the direct reference to the Messiah, the same one who was rejected, pierced, and crucified, who returns as king. Revelation, written by the Apostle John 600 years later, reiterates this final threat, naming Gog and Magog again. The nations will rebel one last time, surround the camp of the saints, and try to destroy the people of God. But there will be no battle. The fire of God will consume them with judgment. The prophetic plan does not change. Israel remains the center of the stage of final fulfillment. It is God's prophetic clock. Its dispersion was prophesied, its return was prophesied, its hardening and its awakening also. In the last conflict, when all the nations gather against Jerusalem, God Himself will respond with power. There in Jerusalem, the Messiah was rejected. There He was lifted on a cross, and there He will return as King. Every event, every threat, every war marks another step towards the fulfillment of what is written. When the people of God returned to their land and Jerusalem became their capital again, the prophetic calendar was activated. That is why, when the nations began to align against them, the echoes of the end became impossible to ignore, because everything that was written is about to be fulfilled. Jesus said it with clarity. Learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branches are renewed and its leaves sprout, you know that summer is near. Israel is that fig tree. The prophetic clock began to move when that leaf sprouted in 1948. Today, the prophecies that seemed impossible are happening before our eyes. The return of the Jews to their land, the restoration of Hebrew as a national language, and the emergence of enemy alliances around Israel. The Bible is not an ancient book. It is a map, a clock, a warning, and a promise. Every fulfilled prophecy is one more step in the countdown. But the story is not over. The most important thing is still missing: the breath of the Spirit. When that happens, it will be the beginning of the eternal beginning. When you see these things beginning to happen, redemption is near. The final pages are already open. The place where history began will be the same place where eternity will begin.